welcome to the third and final episode of Clearing the Smoke, the podcast to help you clear your mind and clear your lungs. And I am your host, Albert Daniel Cesara. For today's episode, we will talk about the youth, smoking, and vaping. More specifically, how the tobacco and vape companies market to young people, what are the effects of smoking and vaping, and its financial and social aspects. Now, we're all aware that smoking is terrible for our health, but it's astonishing how readily available these deadly little sticks are for sale. They're treated like regular products that companies are eager to push, especially since they constantly need to attract new customers. And guess who they're after? Yes, the young crowd. They want to hook them early on and make them lifelong fans of their preferred cigarette or vape brands. In this episode, we'll further dig into the marketing tactics used by tobacco and vape companies to target young folks. Plus, we'll uncover the social, financial, and physical impact these products can have on our lives. Last episode, I talked about the history of tobacco in the Philippines and in the world, and the old advertising tactics cigarette companies used back then, more specifically the infamous Marlboro Man, and its origins, success, and failure, and I covered the documentary Death in the West. I also talked a little bit about the recent marketing tactics used by Marlboro, but for today's episode, we will be exploring other modern advertising tactics and campaigns used by tobacco and vaping companies to appeal to the youth, the impact of vaping, and its financial and social aspects. So without further ado, welcome to the third and final episode of Clearing the Smoke. So sit back, relax, and as always, thank you for tuning in. Now, in the last episode, I mostly focused on the Marlboro Man campaign. Now, the reason why is because I wanted to not only explore the history of the ad campaign, but I also saw this trend in the company's advertising tactics, which is their tendency to use lifestyle marketing, which is defined in the last episode as the advertising of products that promotes a lifestyle or value that appeals to the customer. One of the recent Marlboro ad campaigns is Be Marlboro. The whole premise of the campaign is to once again advertise Marlboro as a cigarette for the brave and free. But instead of using a cowboy to market it, they appeal to the customers by showing them how they could live the lives they want by smoking Marlboro. And by doing so, they have the strength to pursue their dreams. The ads typically depicted young, attractive individuals engaged in exciting activities like outdoor adventures, socializing, or pursuing personal passions. Using such slogans like "A maybe never reached the top, don't be a maybe," with an image of a woman standing on top of a building, smoking a Marlboro and enjoying the view of the city, or one of its more blatant ones being "A maybe never fell in love," paired with an image of a couple kissing. So they basically said that if you don't smoke, you'll never get a girlfriend. Marlboro's got no chill. Anyways, with an ad campaign like this, it was sure to attract some controversy, and unsurprisingly, it did. With anti-smoking groups calling them out for their blatant attempts at trying to appeal to a younger market, more specifically teenagers. In a script for the Philip Morris International Investor Day, brand portfolio and commercial approach presented by the company's international's Senior Vice President of Marketing and Sales, Frederick DeWide, he explained that the concept behind the campaign was that young adults feel overwhelmed by the flood of information and options that new technologies offer. In this time of uncertainty, they have very few life compasses that can provide them with guidance. With the new campaign, Marlboro encourages them to be decisive, trust themselves, and follow their inspiration. The concept is very simple. There are 3 ways to react when faced with a decision: yes, no, or maybe. Marlboro does not believe in maybes. Now, their attempts to appeal to minors were so blatant, in fact, that the ad campaign was banned. In Germany, at least. In October 2013, German court banned the ad campaign for violating Germany's tobacco advertising law, as they found that it encourages minors to smoke. Now, according to a report done by the local, they found that the Munich authorities have deemed the advertising campaign as unacceptable for targeting teenagers and adolescents. The campaign, titled Don't Be a Maybe, features young people engaging in spontaneous and free-spirited activities, implying that smoking helps them break free from indecision. The posters, which began appearing on German billboards in 2011, were found to actively encourage young people to start smoking. The campaign has faced criticism from anti-smoking groups, citing that the average age for Germans to start smoking is 14. Initially, the ads were pulled by Philip Morris in June 2012 following complaints from Munich authorities, but they were officially banned on Wednesday. Now, Philip Morris plans to challenge the decision, stating that it lacks a legal and factual basis. The ban applies immediately to all posters, flyers, and cinema advertisements. Aside from the campaign itself, it also utilized events such as the Mini Cooper Party held in San Pedro Laguna on July 23 of 2013 and featured prizes such as iPods, iPads, laptops, and even a chance to fly to Singapore. Or in Tunisia, they utilized young, attractive spokespersons who interacted directly with young people at the beach to invite them to exclusive parties. These spokespersons use electronic tablets to gather consumer information and ask participants to declare themselves as yes, no, or maybe. Those selected yes were encouraged to compete for branded merchandise. Now, in Latin America, the B Malboro Summer Beach Tour invited young people to try various extreme sports, engage with brand representatives, receive passes for free drinks, and attend concerts and parties. These beach events were invitation only, further solidifying their exclusivity. Now, I feel like the whole campaign preyed on the insecurities and desires of teenagers to be cool, confident, and free. The ads would prominently feature images of thrill seekers, sex, parties, basically the idea of being cool and free to do whatever you want, coupled with slogans such as maybe never fell in love, maybe never wrote a song, maybe never feels free, maybe never lights up the night, and so on and so forth. They promoted this idea of being decisive, confident, and free through the consumption of cigarettes. Now, Stanford University stated that the use of aspirational imagery and values has been a tactic often used by the tobacco industry to market to youth. Internal tobacco documents by Philip Morris itself described smoking as an activity that can be linked to adult initiation, risk-taking, bonding with peers, and the need for the youth to feel like they belong to a group that can partake in an adult activity. So basically, they're telling teenagers that by smoking and being Marlboro, they are able to become the person they want to be, live their lives the way they want, and have freedom. But in reality, their tobacco addiction has more control of their lives than they do and become slaves to the cigarette. It's like they wanted teenagers to feel left out of the fun, and by smoking Marlboro, they become part of something greater. An essential resource to this whole Be Marlboro campaign debacle is a report done by Tobacco Free Kids titled You're the Target, which is basically an expose of the whole ad campaign. I say that this is essential because they were able to acquire Marlboro's secret market research titled Archetype Project Summary and found that Philip Morris International spent $6.97 billion for the whole marketing campaign. And the report deems the whole ad campaign to be exploitative of the adolescents' search for identity by suggesting that, in the face of uncertainty, that they should be a Marlboro smoker. Furthermore, they stated that although PMI insists that they target legal age smokers, the 31 campaign advertisements from around the world clearly focus on youth-oriented images and themes that appeal to teenagers and feature young attractive models partying, falling in love, adventuring, traveling, and generally being cool. In addition, they also uncovered the history behind the Archetype Project, including the rationale behind the whole project. They found that one key study conducted by Philip Morris in the 1990s examined the emotional reasons for why people smoke. The study described smoking as an activity that can be linked to adult initiation rituals, risk-taking, bonding with peers, and the need for the youth to feel like they belong to a group. It also highlighted several strategies to make smoking more appealing to teenagers. And these strategies are portraying smoking as something exclusive to adults, which makes it more enticing to teenagers. Associating smoking with risk-taking and defying taboos, appealing to those who see life as an adventure. Linking the popularity of a specific brand to enhancing the consumer's identity and sense of belonging to a group, and utilizing images that convey an American identity characterized by growth, exploration, and striving, while emphasizing the ritualistic aspects of smoking, such as the fire and smoke. According to the Health Justice Philippines, they observed that with the new Marlboro campaign, Marlboro encourages adult smokers to be decisive, trust themselves, and follow their inspiration. Marlboro does not believe in maybes. Furthermore, they observed that the printed materials don't explicitly show people smoking cigarettes or have the word Marlboro in big bold letters, but rather have attractive or positive statements that sound rebellious, urging them to exert power and authority by making firm decisions and connecting these positive attributes to the brand. In a research titled Decide Now by Marlboro, examining the influence and appeal of Marlboro's new brand architecture among Filipino adolescents, which involved surveying 623 adolescents aged 13 to 17 and conducting focus group discussions, they found that Marlboro advertisements were more identifiable and likable compared to a local brand called Mighty, especially among non-smokers. Likability of the ads was associated with a higher intention to smoke among non-smokers, and perceived effectiveness of the ads increased the odds of intention to smoke for both non-smokers and smokers. The focus group discussions revealed that the Marlboro ads were seen as appealing, promoting adventure and freedom, while Mighty was considered for adults and current smokers. These findings highlight the appeal of Marlboro ads to youth and suggest the need for stricter regulations on tobacco marketing in the Philippines. Another tactic that cigarette companies would use are flavored cigarettes. Now, we all know that cigarette smoke stinks, right? So what do cigarette companies do? Create flavored cigarettes to mask the terrible scent. So not only are you burying yourself in a new addiction and destroying your own body, but you get to smell fresh while doing it. Here in the Philippines, cigarette with flavored or menthol capsules are sold, however, are not as popular as vapes. Now, research suggests that these kinds of cigarettes were made in an effort to appeal to younger customers. One study conducted here in the Philippines assessed young adults' perception of flavored cigarettes and found that the flavor of the cigarette, combined with an appealing packaging, factored into their decision to smoke. The participants perceived flavored capsule cigarettes to be safer and more attractive than their normal counterparts, and were interested in trying them. However, in regards to the menthol cigarettes, the strength of the menthol as well as the color of the packaging played into their perception of how safe the cigarettes are. And with that, the participants differentiated the types of menthols used in cigarettes, with light menthols being associated with blue boxes, which are perceived to be less harmful, while stronger menthols are associated with green boxes and are perceived to be more harmful. Furthermore, the participants deemed that boxes with lighter colors were perceived to have a lighter taste, while those with the darker colors were perceived to have a stronger taste. Participants are also talked about the finish of the pack and noted how a shiny finish on the packaging would be more attractive, with one even commenting, "Actually, it will be more attractive in minimal light, especially in clubs because of its luminous effect." Considering how appealing these kinds of cigarettes are with their enticing flavor and pleasant smell, they may appear to be a better option than regular cigarettes. However, it is important to remember that these flavored cigarettes are still as dangerous as normal ones. In fact, by removing the most unappealing part of smoking, they can actually exacerbate the problem and make smoking even worse. Flavored cigarettes have the potential to intensify the smoking due to their appeal and enticing characteristics and make it easier for younger people to try smoking. These kinds of cigarettes serve as entry-level products into the real deal and could make it easier for the youth to spiral into an addiction. Now that I've covered the advertising and marketing tactics used by tobacco companies, let's move on to vapes. Now, I'm gonna assume that you guys are aware of what vapes are and how they work. So, they're very popular here in the Philippines. You can see them everywhere. There's there's a lot of vape shops in the Bayan. So one of the most common reasons for vaping is that it's safer than cigarettes. While it is true that vaping is a safer alternative as it's basically intended to help smokers quit, you have to understand that vapes still have nicotine inside of them. And if you were to vape, you would still feel the effect, you would still experience the same effects as smoking, although to a lesser extent. Now, another reason for vaping is that it's cheaper than buying cigarettes. Now, cigarette packs would usually cost around 120 pesos, and if you were to run through one pack every day in a week, it would cost you roughly around 840 pesos. While on the other hand, disposable vapes like Elf bars or Geek bars would be sold around 300 plus pesos but would last for a week or two. So not only do you get hooked, you also save money while doing it. People also vape because of the smell and taste, and I think that what I mentioned earlier about the flavored capsules, cigarettes, apply to this. Vaping has also received some exposure through mainstream media. One instance that I can recall where vaping was prominently featured in a show was Filipinas Got Talent, where there were two there were actually two contestants who did vape tricks as their routine. These guys are Joven Olvido and JM Bayot, and surprisingly, Joven with his skills in vaping and comedy actually reached the grand finals and became a third runner-up. And for JM, I actually don't know what happened. And these videos would rack up millions and millions of views, with Joven's audition reaching 45 million views while JM's receiving 12 million. And Joven's audition actually became an internet meme at one point. Not so fun fact, did you know that Joven was actually arrested on February 19, 2022 for peddling drugs in Santa Cruz, Laguna? Anyways, moving on. Aside from television, vaping is also pretty popular in social media, with people sharing their own tricks or reviewing vapes and vape-related products. For me, I never really paid any attention to any of this content because I just do not care about vaping, and I think that this is just another silly trend, but I digress. With all those considered, vapes are very popular among the youth here in the Philippines, to the point that in a global youth tobacco survey conducted in 2019 found that approximately 1 out of 7 students aged 13 to 15 years old is using e-cigarettes, which, if I'm gonna be honest, is very, very disheartening to hear. And this is below the legal age limit. The study also reveals that tobacco products are easily accessible to young people, with 37.1% of youth able to purchase these products without any age restrictions. This accessibility includes both physical stores and street vendors, as well as through advertisements on social media platforms. Now, there is a common notion that vaping is safer than cigarettes, and while it is true to some extent, you also have to understand that it is not entirely harmless, as it would lead you to believe. Now, we have to also understand that vaping is very recent and is not as extensively researched as cigarettes. Also, if you want to learn more about the effects of cigarettes on the body, I highly suggest listening to the first episode of my podcast. Now, exposure to secondhand vape smoke, however, is not as extensively researched as a cigarette counterpart. However, there have been cases made against its harmfulness. A 2014 study by Igor Busti entitled Peering Through the Mist: Systematic Review of What the Chemistry of Contaminants in Electronic Cigarettes tells us about health risks found that e-cigarette use doesn't pose significant health risk based on the exposure to contaminants. The levels of substances like acrolein and formaldehyde were below recommended limits. Even when considering the mixture of contaminants, it was unlikely to exceed half of the recommended limits. However, the monitoring of the main ingredients, which are propylene glycol and glycerine, is advised as a precaution. Overall, the study suggests that e-cigarette risks are not as concerning as workplace exposures. Aside from a lack of research, bias or unfairly controlled experiments exist too. One such example is a 2015 Portland State University experiment wherein they use a tank system e-cigarette and set it to a voltage higher than the ones used in actual smaller vapes. Now, this setup caused the e-cigarette machine to produce high levels of formaldehyde that would make it unbearable for humans to breathe. This is known to vapors as a dry puff, which, according to VapeMate, is when you fire up a vape kit with too little e-liquid in the tank to properly wick the cotton in your atomizer. When a coil burns dry, it emits unsafe toxins. Specifically, it emits high levels of aldehydes. Now, a 2017 experiment was set to debunk the 2015 one by using the same setup and found that the high levels of formaldehyde emissions that were reported in a previous study were caused by unrealistic use conditions that create the unpleasant taste of dry puffs to e-cigarette users and are thus avoided. 2018 research by Farsalinas and Gilman stressed the importance of proper analytical methods due to the complex nature of the chemicals found in e-cigarettes, as well as called for future researchers and studies to avoid dry puff conditions to achieve realistic testing and avoid misleading results, with them stating that, additionally, analytical methods need to be accurately validated since the possibility of false positive and false negative results is of concern due to the complexity of ingredients in flavored liquids. It is particularly important that laboratory studies ensure that no dry puffs are generated under laboratory conditions. Otherwise, testing realistic conditions relevant to true human exposure cannot be ensured, and the findings could be misleading and misinformative for consumers and regulators. On the other hand, there has been evidence and cases made against vapes. Now, we need to understand that while vaping may seem as a safer alternative to smoking, it is not without its risks. For one, vaping was linked to asthma as a research published in 2019 involving 402,822 individuals who had never smoked combustible cigarettes found that 0.8% were current e-cigarette users and 8.5% had asthma. The current e-cigarette users, particularly those in the 18 to 24 age group, had 39% higher odds of self-reported asthma compared to those who had never used e-cigarettes. The likelihood of having asthma increased with the intensity of e-cigarette use, ranging from a 31% higher odds for occasional users to a 73% higher odds for daily users, compared to those who never used e-cigarettes. These findings suggest a potential link between e-cigarette use and increased asthma risk, indicating the need for further longitudinal studies to examine pulmonary health in young adults who use e-cigarettes. One's brain functions can also be affected by vaping, as noted by the CDC. They found that the nicotine in vapes can harm the developing adolescent brain, as the brain keeps developing until we hit 25. Using nicotine in adolescence can harm the parts of the brain that control attention, learning, mood, and impulse control. Furthermore, due to how young people's brains build synapses faster than adult brains, nicotine changes the formation of these synapses to make it so that they always want to smoke. If you want to learn more about the effects of nicotine in the brain, I highly suggest listening to episode 1. Furthermore, users will also experience the usual symptoms of nicotine withdrawal, such as cravings for cigarettes, mood changes, difficulty concentrating, trouble sleeping, and so on and so forth. Users going through withdrawal may also experience depression, anxiety, or sadness and vape in order to cope. However, smoking may temporarily alleviate these symptoms, but it is not a healthy coping mechanism. Smokers also become restless when going through withdrawal due to the body adjusting to the absence of nicotine. Withdrawal can also increase your appetite and weight gain, which is caused by the stress of needing something to occupy the mouth and hands. So if you don't want to go through the hassle of experiencing withdrawal symptoms, don't smoke or vape in the first place. But if you are going through withdrawal, I suggest getting help from your loved ones or professionals. Vaping was also linked to the spontaneous pneumothorax, wherein the lungs would suddenly collapse. A research in 2019 titled Vaping is a Risk Factor for Spontaneous Pneumothorax 2 cases reported the first two cases that linked the risk of spontaneous pneumothorax to vape use. These said cases were two males aged 15 and 16. The first patient, the 15-year-old, had no prior use of weed nor tobacco, but his physical examinations revealed reduced breath sounds on the left side, and a chest x-ray showed a left-sided pneumothorax. And to resolve his symptoms, a thoracostomy catheter was placed. He was discharged but experienced a recurrent pneumothorax 2 months later. He admitted to vaping during both occurrences. He underwent surgery and chest tube placement, followed by smoking and vaping cessation counseling. The patient has been symptom-free for 8 months. The second patient was a 16-year-old male who experienced sudden right-sided chest pain and shortness of breath. He had no prior history of tobacco or cannabis use and no significant medical history. Physical examination revealed decreased breath sounds on the right side. A chest x-ray showed a 4.8 cm right-sided pneumothorax. A catheter was placed, resolving the pneumothorax, and removed on the second day. However, the patient returned a week later with recurrent symptoms and admitted to a history of vaping. He underwent surgery for pleurodesis and bleb resection, followed by smoking and vaping cessation counseling. The patient recovered successfully and has remained symptom-free for the past 9 months. Vaping was also linked to a higher likelihood of stroke, as in a study conducted in 2019 wherein they analyzed a sample that included 66,795 respondents who reported ever using e-cigarettes and a control group of 343,856 respondents who reported never using e-cigarettes. Logistic regression analysis was used to calculate odds ratios, and adjustments were made for various factors such as age, sex, smoking status, diabetes, exercise, and BMI categories. Now, the results show that 21% of BRFSS respondents reported ever using e-cigarettes, with a higher proportion of females. E-cigarette users were generally younger, had lower BMI, and had a lower rate of diabetes compared to non-users. However, they had a significantly higher rate of cigarette smoking. When compared to non-users, e-cigarette users had higher adjusted odds of stroke, myocardial infarction, and angina or coronary heart disease. The odds ratios indicated an increased risk for these cardiovascular conditions among e-cigarette users. Even with all that, we still have to understand that vapes are very recent and are not as widely studied as cigarettes. But that does not mean that what I just said was meaningless, and I still think that you could be doing better things than vaping or smoking. Now that I have laid out the physical issues of smoking and vaping, how does it affect us socially and financially? In regards to our social life, smoking and vaping are complete opposites. Smoking is generally frowned upon due to its association with being unclean and harmful. On the other hand, vaping is perceived by some individuals, though not universally, as a cleaner and potentially safer alternative. It's important to note that these perceptions may vary among different people and communities. A study conducted in Northern England in 2023 found that negative perceptions of e-cigarette harm relative to cigarettes were driven by concern about the perceived lack of research and safety issues. Negative perceptions about e-cigarettes' effectiveness for smoking cessation were guided by fears that e-cigarettes would perpetuate nicotine addiction. As I have mentioned earlier, vaping is a very recent phenomenon. On the other hand, a 2019 survey found that a significant portion of Generation Z, ages 18 to 22, and millennials, ages 23 to 38, thinks vaping is safe. Approximately 20% of Generation Z and 24% of millennials believe that e-cigarettes are not harmful, and around 22% of Generation Z and 24% of millennials believe that e-cigarettes are not addictive. Roughly 27% of Generation Z and 29% of millennials think that flavored e-cigarettes are less harmful to to health compared to non-flavored ones. The perception of e-cigarettes, however, are more clear-cut compared to vaping. A 2013 study stated that smokers are perceived negatively in terms of characteristics of their smoking, such as motivation to quit and dependence. We found that these negative perceptions influence attitudes about smokers, which in turn influence willingness to interact with them for certain close relationships. Now that I think about it, back then people thought that smoking was cool. But as time passes, with people more cognizant of the dangers of smoking and with the rise of vaping, smoking has become synonymous with irresponsibility, lack of self control, and horrible life choices, and because of this, smoking has rightfully fallen out of fashion. And as I have mentioned in the first episode, tobacco use has actually seen a decline in recent years. Now, financially, smoking and vaping are quite an investment, and a horrible one at that. Due to how accessible vaping and smoking are, the government is taking steps to raise the prices to deter minors from purchasing these products. Now, the Bureau of International Revenue has increased the floor prices of tobacco products. What is the floor price, you may ask? A floor price is defined as the minimum retail price of a product set by the BIR. The product the price considers the excise tax, the production tax, and the value added tax or VAT. Now, why are they raising the prices on tobacco? BIR Assistant Commissioner Jeffro Sabariaga explains that sellers selling cigarettes at prices lower than the cost of production and excise tax makes the sale of cigarettes illegal, as there's a strict prescribed minimum price for these products. Aside from compensating for the production, the price raise also serves as a warning to the public for the dangers of smoking, as he stated that if products are being sold at amounts less than that, then these products are illegal and put consumers in danger from cigarette smoking. Furthermore, for heated tobacco products, the floor price per pack decreased to 120.40 pesos from 140 pesos. For those with production cost of 75 pesos, an excise tax of 32.50 pesos, and a VAT of 12.90 pesos. The BIR set a floor price of 200 pesos for a 2 milliliter pod of nicotine for vapes. For a conventional freebase or classic nicotine, the floor price has been set at 179.20 pesos for a 10 milliliter bottle with production cost of 100 pesos, an excise tax of 60 pesos, and VAT of 19.20 pesos. A larger bottle of 30 milliliter classic nicotine increased to 403.20 pesos from 352.80 pesos. Aside from market prices, tobacco and vape use can actually affect your life insurance. Now, according to Policy Advisor, life insurance costs are based on your health and lifestyle choices. One major price factor is your smoking status. If you're a smoker, you're subject to higher insurance rates. If you smoke, vape, or consume any nicotine products, you are considered a smoker. It usually takes a waiting period of 1 year after you quit smoking to get non-smokers' rates. According to the co-operators, due to the health problems and a shorter lifespan, smokers are an insurance risk, and as a result, life insurance for smokers comes with higher premiums. Now, an article by Progressive details its premiums by stating that when determining your eligibility and setting your premium, life insurance companies evaluate your current health and lifestyle risks. Smoking and tobacco use are considered as major lifestyle risks, resulting in higher premiums. Life insurance rates for smokers can potentially even depend on your frequency and type of use. Depending on your insurer, you can typically lower your life insurance premium by permanently quitting, usually by being nicotine-free for at least a year or more. When setting up life insurance, you must disclose to your insurance provider about your tobacco or vape use, or you would have to go through a COTS or cotinine test, which would detect any nicotine in your body through your urine. Although providers will have different definitions of what constitutes as a smoker and will require you to pay a higher premiums if you have smoked one or more cigarettes in the past 12 months, are taking nicotine replacement products such as Champix and Nicabate, including patches and gum, within 12 months of quitting smoking, and you smoke e-cigarettes. Furthermore, you must also declare to your insurance provider that you are a smoker. Not telling your provider about your tobacco replacement product, or vape use would count as concealment or material misrepresentation and would invalidate your policy. However, if you quit smoking, you are entitled to non-smoker rates. Aside from the cost of smoking and insurance, smoking and vaping is just a pain in general, as treatments for illnesses caused by smoking and vaping are very costly and would be very difficult for low-income families, as they would struggle to pay the costs for these treatments and end up in debt. Now, with all of that aside, how can we help? If you yourself are a smoker or vape user, call 165-364 or text Stop Smoke to 29290 165-354. For Globe and TM subscribers, call 0977-627-7539, and for Smart TNT and Sun subscribers, call 0921-203-9534. These are the numbers for the DOH's quit line. And if you are friends with a smoke or vape user, encourage them to get professional help, or just encourage them to do other things than smoking, like exercising or taking a hobby. And always remember, be patient with them, because an addiction is a hard battle, and encourage them to be better every step of the way. Well, that's all I have for you folks. This has been a really fun journey for me, and I hope you feel the same way as well. If you want to show some love for this podcast, hit the like button, leave a comment, and if you want to, subscribe. Anyways, thank you all for listening, and take care everybody.